Hey, yo, check this out. Bada bang. Welcome back to another episode of Psycosmos. Today, we are going to talk about traditional versus sidereal astrology. Okay, so a lot of people talk about traditional versus sidereal astrology. What is it and why exactly is it so important? Okay, I'm going to try to make this somewhat simple. I can't guarantee that because you know me, guys. I ramble like a motherfucker. Traditional versus sidereal, West versus East, if you didn't know. Traditional is considered Western astrology. It was mainly devised by some Egyptian, some Greek, a lot of Greek actually. Some Jewish, interpretations, and then sidereal is mainly China, India, and those countries over there on the eastern side, really heavily on the Vedas, the Vedic people of India. So this is really East versus West. Okay, which one's accurate? Which one's right? I'm gonna answer that question because there's definitely an answer. There's not a real answer to that question. Okay, so let me explain why people use both. I use both. How can you use both? One says one thing, the other says the other thing. They're actually the same. That's right. I said it. They're the same. And if you think otherwise, you don't know anything about astrology. Just joking. But let me actually explain. So what we have in this system is really a differentiation of tracking the planets. That's really what it is. Whereas the Western astrologers figured out that the equator, the highest bump of the planet that stretches outward to the stars, that part should be the part that's used as the metric of measurement against the planets, because that's the part that gets hit first with the energy that then cycles throughout the world. Sidereal looks at specifically where the planets are located. Now, there's something that you have to know in order to make sense of why there would be two different systems, and that is the Great Year Cycle. Now, the Great Year Cycle, also known as the Yuga Cycle. Wow, I cannot write on this thing. Yuga Cycle. This is so weird. Okay. Also known as the Yuga Cycle. All right. Now, a lot of people have heard about this. It's also called the Platonic Year, etc., etc. This is a precession that happens every 24,000 years. Okay. So 6,000 or so years ago, when we had the Epic of Gilgamesh and Noah's flood, on the horizon today, March 21st, that's actually today's date, on the horizon at the spring equinox, whatever sign comes up behind the sun, that is the age that we are living in. And that doesn't change for thousands of years. So 2,000 years, so 6,000 years ago, when our ancestors were looking at the horizon on March 21st, which was technically the first day of the year, they saw Taurus coming up over the horizon. Then you have the Nordics writing about a bull, and then you have the Indians writing about a bull, and then you have the Christians writing about bulls. So all of this astrological interpretations, they're very deeply rooted in a lot of our stuff, right? But this Yuga cycle and the Great Year Cycle, this was something that our ancestors obsessed over because they knew that every 6,000 or so years there was going to be a calamity. This is why the Mayan calendar predicted it. This is why the Greco-Roman calendars predicted it astrologically. Basically, the India peoples, the Vedas, they all have basically come to their similar conclusions. Now, what happens in this cycle is basically our sun is in a binary, probably a trinary, but for now, for the case of this argument, it's in what's called a binary star system. So here's the sun, and then here's the star Sirius, Isis, the mother star, in the sign of Cancer, which is the mother sign. And our sun is a sun, S-U-N-S-O-N, because these two things have an ecliptic around each other. And when this happens, depending on where our sun is versus that sun and blah, 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 we determine that we are in an age. So you have heard the age of Aquarius. That's the one that we're actually going into now. So actually, that's the one we're in now, or whatever. The point being, we're in that age of Aquarius. This is where we're going to see a lot of those changes that are going to unfold surrounding people and technology, right? So it makes total sense, exactly where we're supposed to be. But these things, these movements, as both Western and Eastern understood it, because both of these have a cycle. Again, I just named them. Great Year or Platonic after Plato, or the Yuga cycle. They both have this same exact cycle. I think one of them's a little bit longer than the other by 1,000 years or something like that, but it's semantics. It's semantics. It's the exact same thing. So the Sidereal, the Indian Vedas, they're looking at where the planets and all of those actually are in the sky. So believe it or not, if you're using Western astrology, and again, today's date is March 21st, 2023. If you're using Western astrology, they're going to tell you that the sun and the moon are both in Aries right now. If you're doing Eastern astrology, they're both going to say that they're in Pisces right now. That's a big difference. Pisces and Aries are pretty separate signs. They're pretty different. All the signs are different. But what's up with the discrepancy? Well, like I said, this one is going off of where the energy from the sun and the moon and all this, how it's hitting the equator. Whereas this is more looking up to see, oh, well, here's Aries, right? And then here's the moon. Oh, well, the moon's in Aries. Whereas a traditional person would say, oh, the moon's in Taurus, because I'm looking at it from how that moon is refracted against the sign of Taurus, because here's where that energy is hitting the equator. Okay, so the Sidereal is more of a looking up and saying, that's where the position actually is. And the Western is saying, well, how does it impact the planet? And that's why it's different, and that's why they're both right. That's right, I said it. They're both correct, and I'm going to explain why. Because you're looking at one placement from the perspective of us. So if you're looking outwardly, if you're looking out into the stars, you're going to see that the moon is in Pisces. In my example here with the March 21st, if you're looking up into the sky, you're going to see the moon is actually in Pisces. For traditional, they're not really looking up at the sky specifically. They're more feeling the energy of how it impacts the planet and the people around us. Now, here's the real truth. You want the real truth? I'll give you the real truth. This great year cycle, the Yuga cycle, proves to us a number of things. Number one, energy is displaced. Okay, so energy actually does not work like a lot of people don't believe in cusps in astrology, and I find that ridiculous because energy does not just lock after the first day. Anybody who's an astrologer telling you that cusps aren't real, it's not how energy works. The signs are all different sizes. You're not going to tell me that September 24th we're not still feeling Virgo. The sun's in Virgo. It's still going to be in Virgo. So the signs are different sizes, energy's different, and it's all a blend. It's all, the same way that you would look at light through a prism. It's all a blend, right? It all blends together. It's not like you can see lines divided like I have here, lines divided in the color spectrum. So really what this means is the moon is actually in Aries, technically, because of how we're feeling it, but it's got some of that Pisces energy. Now, how does that make any sense? Well, basically, it's like this. Because of this, again, my little really well-drawn thing here, because of this precession of the equinoxes, because of these cycles, great year cycle, Yuga cycle, whatever you want to call it, basically, 2,000 years ago when Jesus Christ was born, all of the planets aligned. Okay, so we were in the age of Aries going into Pisces. This cycle works backwards from our perspective. So it's actually backwards. So instead of moving forwards, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, the Yuga cycle, that cycle works backwards. So we went from Taurus 6,000 years ago to Aries 4,000 years ago, because each is 2,000 years roughly. Then we went to Pisces right at when Jesus was born. And the reason that was important is because it's kind of what you would call a harmonic convergence. Shout out to Christian Mystic because he's the one that gave me that. It's like a harmonic convergence, okay? All of the energy aligned perfectly, and this is why the sages deemed Jesus Christ to be the Son of God, because all of the astrological planetary objects in these cycles all aligned perfectly, and so they were looking for somebody to be the Messiah. That's really why that whole situation was so important. That's why Jesus came at the time that he did. That's why we use that as year zero. Okay, but now we're not in year zero. Now we're in year 2000. That means one sign has shifted. We went from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, and because of that, Both of these systems know that there is a play with angles at work. Now, a lot of people think, they get into astrology and they think, oh, well, this is the mainstream and this is kind of hidden, so this has to be right? Actually, it's the other way around. This is more from a perspective of just to keep in mind that we are still lagging behind a little bit. But if you want one that, in my opinion, is more accurate, it's actually traditional from the energetic sense. Every event that happens, every time somebody's born, everybody's natural astrology from a Western aspect, that one actually does take precedence over the sidereal. It's the way that it is. Now, with that being said, sidereal is only going to get stronger as we move in the next 6,000 years towards the age of Leo. And the reason that this was so popular was because this was right around the time where they were actually seeing the harmonic convergences. So there wasn't too much to really go off of as far as planning angles, because everything was already pretty much aligned over the 2,000 years ago, like give or take 1,000 years back and forward, right? Which is really where a lot of this stuff is supposedly said to have come out. So whereas the traditional Western astrology, this was something that's kind of been built upon for thousands of years. Unfortunately, for a lot of the Eastern peoples, yes, they do really specialize in this, but I would say not as heavily as in the West, and that's because of a lot of the wars and the people that have come in and conquered them and such. But yes, still very, very important. But really what this is here to do is to keep in mind, for example, if the Western astrology here, as an example, says that the moon is now going into Aries, okay, but this one says the moon's going into Pisces, really the moon is actually like, it's actually here. That's actually where the moon is, okay? It's just a little bit behind where the Western says. Now, from our perspective of looking, it's actually here, like physically in the sky. But that's not how the energy works, because we have another angular momentum that we have to keep in mind, which is this binary system. So because these two bodies shifted, the light is going to impact us a different way. At least this is what they claim, the sages. But I will tell you, as somebody who's an astrologer and who does this stuff, traditional often takes precedence, yes. But with that being said, it's very simple math, okay? We have 12 signs, all right? 2,000 years ago, all the signs were exactly the way that they were, to their perfect, epitomized extent, because we had this energy. There was no extra angles. In fact, they said there's a lot of writings in Egyptian and Greek old cultures that said that, roughly 12,000 years ago during the age of Leo, that humans were, like, they had weird fanatical intelligence and superhuman capabilities. There are some sources that say that. Now, do I believe that? Yes or no? It doesn't matter. My point is, if that's true, that would be because of the fact that you have, two opposing suns that are on opposite spectrums. So it's causing this, again, convergence, where you're not just getting one sign when you're born, you're getting like half of the signs. Today, you're basically getting two, all right? So if you're born in Aries, you actually have a little bit of Pisces in you. So you just add the sign that was behind you, but just a little bit. And honestly, it's 1/12. It's 1/12, okay? You just go 1/12 back. So you take 360 degrees, you divide that by, or you can multiply that by 1/12. So you take like 360 degrees and you can multiply that by 1/12, or divide it by 12 or whatever. And you're going to get 30 degrees for each one of these. So each of these is 30 degrees, right? Well, all we have to do is just take 1/12 of 30. And we get our answer. 12 goes into 30 2.5 times, which means that basically each sign is about, from the Western position, it's about 2.5 to 3 degrees behind where it actually is in Western astrology. That's really what we're talking about here. So if you really want to take both of these into consideration, take Western astrology and then just subtract 3 degrees from pretty much the moon or the sun, ultimately, because they work on their same patterns. But yeah, it's really that simple. It's like it's pretty simple. It's kind of complicated, but basically, because we're one sign ahead in this Yuga cycle, that means that we're going to get some of the energy from behind, from a sign back. Just a little bit, though. Like I said, it's a 12th. And in 2,000 years, it'll be another 12th. If this is 30 degrees and the moon is roughly, it goes through a whole thing, roughly 28, 30 days. It goes through a sign every 2-something days. It's basically just used for timekeeping from a sense of just understanding that there is an impact that is going to lag these planets backwards. This one is going a whole sign backwards. I understand why it's doing that, and I understand why it's important to keep both of these in mind for future references on astrology. We're actually, as we move forward in time, astrology is actually going to get more complicated, and we're going to have to account for these things. But no, just because the moon is placed in that position does not mean that that's how the energy impacts the Earth. And this is something that we obviously study with different planetary motions and objects and asteroids and a bunch of other stuff. So again, this is all about placements. It's all about light angles. Both of them are correct. They're both correct. If you look up in the sky, the moon's in Pisces right now, but you're going to feel that the moon's in Aries, and that's because of the way that the energy impacts and hits the planet. And we're already feeling that rush here. Energy from a high level impacts smaller things first. It impacts them on a much grander level, especially earlier than it would throughout the rest of the cosmos. So really what I'm saying is there's a balance to this. I personally take traditional astrology and accompany Sidereal. I use that as my primary and this one as my secondary. And this is good. This is still good. But I will tell you from an astrologer standpoint, I don't think that the Sidereal placements are the ones that you should be using for things like sacred secretion timing, for example. Now, with that being said, my system for sacred secretion incorporates sidereal astrology because I tell people to continue to do the process a sign later than they would. So if you're in Aries, I say end when the moon goes into Gemini and out of Taurus. Why? Because if the sidereal is accurate and they're using Western astrology, which most of you are, then you're going to say, oh, the moon's in Taurus and I'm a Taurus. Or I'm sorry. Then you're going to say, oh, the moon's in Aries, I'm an Aries. But the moon might actually be in Pisces. So you're actually doing your prep phase, not your final phase of the sacred secretion. In which case, then you might end your sacred secretion process too early while it's culminating. So what I tell people is to go all throughout the next sign just to account for the sidereal and also because it doesn't hurt. So ultimately, this is my example on sidereal versus Western astrology. It's not the best example. I hope that it got the point across, but the whole goal of what I was trying to show is that this is a much bigger issue than just what these two are telling you from the get-go. It's not just like, oh, it's one sign back. They're really the same thing. Because all of the placements for sidereal pretty much 90% of the time are going to be the exact same as traditional. It's just going to be a sign behind. But again, this is just to keep in mind with us, like, hey, don't forget to track the placement of those planets because that does make a difference too. That's basically the way that it is. So I would definitely say that my astrology personally is way more geared towards traditional than it is sidereal. I have found most people are that way as well. If you had any questions, maybe I made this confusing. Maybe this was really eye-opening to some people. Sorry for my chicken scratch shit handwriting. I love you guys very much. Thank you for watching. Make sure you guys go drop a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think. If you got beef with me or if you think this is right or whatever, just talk about it down in the comments below. Again, I'm also not saying that this is like the 100% right way, but I see a lot of people online who are like, oh, here's the real sidereal calendar for astrology, and Pisces actually starts on March 23rd, and I'm like, that is so not true. Don't tell people that. You're going to confuse people. Don't tell people that. That is a bad idea, because really what it is if you're born March 23rd or something, you're an Aries, but you're an Aries Pisces cusp, and you're a heavier cusp because you're further out in this Yuga cycle than you would be 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, you'd be pretty much just an Aries. You'd pretty much just be an Aries born March 23rd. 2,000 years later, again, we're shifting things up a few degrees. So really, what I'm trying to say here is the equinoxes don't start on the 21st anymore. They pretty much start 23rd, 24th. And that's pretty much what we're going to see. And then in 2,000 years, the equinox's energy would pretty much start like, the 6/27, something like that. But again, I would still be willing to say in our current modern era, this 1/12 metric is not as important. This is so that later on down the road, further on, we can keep that in mind. So just keep all that in mind. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys very much. If you like, you could check out our book. And if not, you could also consider supporting us on Patreon or any other means. But yeah, thank you guys so much. We love you. Take care.